The Clone Wars had raged for 3 years across 1,000 systems, grinding the galaxy into a machine of loyalty and blood. The Jedi were stretched to breaking, their numbers thin across 100 battlefronts. Their faith in the Republic, they served fraying at the edges, even as they refused to admit it aloud. And in the quiet hours before dawn on Coruscant, as the Senate slept and the temple spires caught the first gray light, something tore through the fabric of the galaxy that had nothing to do with the Force at all. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. It began as a ripple in hyperspace, a distortion that no Republic sensor net was built to recognize, not a comet, not a separatist cloaking field, not even the telltale shimmer of a Jedi's precognition. It was a wound in space itself, violet and churning, opening above the ecliptic like an eye blinking into existence. For 3 seconds it held there, silent, impossible. Then it disgorged a shape that no astromech droid in the Republic fleet had a designation for: a dark, angular vessel bristling with weapons ports, its hull scarred from a battle that belonged to no war anyone in this galaxy had ever fought. The USS Defiant hung in space above Coruscant, alarms blaring through every deck, her crew thrown against consoles as the last vestiges of a collapsing wormhole sparked and died along her shields. "Report," Captain Benjamin Sisko said, hauling himself upright from where he'd been thrown against the command chair's armrest. His voice was steady even as his knuckles were not. "That was not the Bajoran wormhole, Lieutenant Commander." Worf's growl carried the particular menace of a Klingon who had just been humiliated by physics. "Structural analysis indicates a spatial rupture of unknown origin. We were pulled off course by nearly." He checked his console, and for a moment, even his composure faltered. 40,000 light years. Dr. Bashir, gripping the edge of a science station, looked up with the expression of a man who had just realized the universe was larger and stranger than his medical degree had prepared him for. "That's not possible. There's no star map reference for this sector. None. It's like we've fallen off every chart Starfleet has ever made." Chief O'Brien was already elbow deep in a console, muttering half to himself and half to the ship. "Because we're not in our galaxy anymore, that's why. Sensors are reading stellar configurations that don't match anything in the database. Wherever the wormhole spat us out, it wasn't home." Sisko moved to the view screen. Below them, wreathed in atmospheric haze and the lights of 10,000 towers stacked impossibly high, a planet-spanning city turned slowly beneath the Defiant's position. A world that was, in its entirety, one single sprawling metropolis, more vast and more artificial than anything Sisko had ever laid eyes on. Even in the heart of the Federation, starships of a design he didn't recognize moved through the orbital lanes below. Sleek Republic cruisers, angular gunships, the distant silhouette of something enormous and militaristic, lurking at the edge of sensor range. "Captain," Worf's voice had changed. "I am detecting a distress signal. Multiple signals, in fact, dozens, scattered across the surface and in nearby systems, all originating within the last several minutes. All abruptly terminated. Terminated how? I do not know. The pattern is inconsistent with weapons fire. It is as though the transmissions were simply cut off." Sisko's jaw tightened. Whatever galaxy the Defiant had fallen into, something was happening down there. Something sudden, something coordinated, and something that was killing people in numbers large enough to leave a wake. Across their sensors, he had commanded deep space 9 through the opening shots of a war with the Dominion. He knew the shape of a crisis when he saw one, even from orbit, even in a galaxy that shouldn't exist. "Kira, I need eyes on that surface." "O'Brien, can you get a lock on the strongest of those signals before it goes dark too?" "Already trying, Captain. But the encryption is..." O'Brien's hands flew across the console. "Actually, wait. It's not encrypted. It's just alien. Give me a second." A pause. Static crackling through the bridge speakers. And then, breaking through the noise, a voice, young, female, breathless, transmitting on a frequency that had no business being readable by Starfleet hardware, and yet somehow was requesting any available forces. "My men have turned on me. I say again, My own men have turned their weapons on the Jedi. This is not a drill, this is. The transmission cut to static. Sisko stood very still for a long moment. The bridge silent around him. Every officer waiting on his next word. Whatever Jedi meant in this galaxy. Whoever had just been betrayed. By their own soldiers in the final seconds of a dying signal. One truth was already clear to a man who had spent a lifetime learning to recognize the sound of a war's true horror arriving all at once. Red alert, Sisko said quietly. Take us down. We're going to find out what just happened to that woman. The Defiant's engines flared to life, her cloaking field shimmering into existence as she dove toward the burning world below, toward a galaxy in the process of betraying itself, and toward the first moments of an order that would come to be known, in whispers and in grief, as 66. The Defiant dropped through Coruscant's upper atmosphere cloaked, her sensors screaming with contradictory data, hundreds of individual life signs, converging on a single massive structure near the planet's core. Clone transport ships scrambling toward it from a dozen directions. And beneath it all, that same voice, weaker now, still transmitting on a dying channel. I have her position, O'Brien called out. Temple District, if that's what that building is. She's pinned down. Multiple hostiles converging. Hostiles, Kira repeated from tactical, her voice edged with disbelief as she studied the readings. Captain, the weapon's signatures on her. Pursuers are identical to the weapons. Signatures of the troops who were supposedly protecting her 30 seconds ago. Sisko had seen enough betrayals to recognize the shape of one even through second-hand sensor data. Same army, different orders. He turned to Worf. Can we get a transporter? Lock through that atmosphere. The city's shielding is minimal by Federation standards, but there is considerable structural interference. I can attempt a lock, but I cannot guarantee accuracy within less than 3 meters. Then we do the best we can. O'Brien, work with him. The moment you have her, pull her aboard. Below them, in the wreckage of a courtyard she had trained in since she was old enough to hold a training saber, Jedi Knight Ayla. Sakura pressed her back against a shattered fountain and tried to reconcile the impossible arithmetic in front of her. 6 clones, men she had led into 3 separate campaigns, men whose names she knew, whose families back on Kamino she had asked after during quiet hours between battles. All 6 of them advancing with their weapons raised, their eyes empty of anything resembling the loyalty she had earned in blood beside them. Stand down, she said, not because she believed it would work, but because some part of her refused to accept the alternative, without saying the words aloud first. Whatever's happening to you, fight it. This isn't you. The answering blaster bolt took a chunk out of the fountain beside her head. She didn't have time to mourn what that meant. She rolled, igniting her lightsaber in the same motion, deflecting the next volley back into the smoke-choked air, buying herself seconds she didn't know how to spend. There was nowhere to retreat to. The temple behind her was already burning in 3 places, and the comm channels that should have carried Jedi voices now carried only static. Or worse, silence where a friend's voice used to be. She felt the world tilt sideways. One moment she was airborne, twisting to avoid a bolt aimed at her spine. The next, she was somewhere else entirely, a cold metal room bathed in unfamiliar light. Her lightsaber still humming in her hand, her balance gone. Her body slamming into a floor grating that rang like a bell beneath her. Whoa, whoa, easy. A human man in an unfamiliar uniform had both hands raised, backing away from her with the particular caution of someone who had just watched a woman appear out of thin air holding a glowing energy blade. Nobody here's shooting at you. You're safe. For now, anyway. Ayla came up into a defensive crouch, saber angled, chest heaving, taking in a room of consoles and readouts and faces that belonged to no species she recognized from a decade of service to the Republic. A Klingon. She knew that word only because some distant memory supplied it, though she couldn't have said why. Stood at a tactical station with a hand resting near a weapon of his own, watching her with wary respect rather than hostility. A dark-skinned man in a command uniform stepped forward, his hands open, his voice pitched low, and even the voice, she realized distantly, of someone who had talked down worse things than a frightened stranger with a weapon. I'm Captain Benjamin Sisko, USS Defiant. You were about to die down there. We pulled you out. I don't know what's happening on your planet, and you don't know anything about us. So let's start there and figure out the rest together." The blade in her hand did not lower. My men, my own men, turned on me. Turned on all of us, everywhere, all at once. I felt it happen through the force before I even heard the shots. Something changed in them. Something was always waiting in them. Cisco's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes sharpened. The look of a man cataloging a new and terrible piece of information. That sounds less like a mutiny and more like a program. A program, Ayla repeated, and for the first time in the last 2 minutes. Something other than survival. Instinct moved behind her eyes. Comprehension. Horror. You think this was planned, built into them. I think, Cisco said carefully, that you should sit down. Let my doctor make sure. You're not bleeding out from something you haven't noticed yet. And then you're going to tell me everything you know about the war you're fighting. Because whatever just happened down there didn't happen by accident. And I intend to find out who benefits from an army turning on the people it's sworn to protect. Outside the Defiant's hull, cloaked and holding position above a city that did not yet know. It had just changed masters. The scope of Order 66 continued to unfold. Jedi falling on 100 worlds. Transmissions dying by the dozen. An entire order of peacekeepers being erased. In the space of a single galactic heartbeat. Aboard the ship, a Jedi Knight who should have died in a Coruscant courtyard sat instead in a Starfleet sickbay, beginning to understand that the galaxy she'd known that morning no longer existed, and that the strangers who'd saved her life might be the only ones left who could help her make sense of what had replaced it. Sickbay aboard the Defiant was smaller than anything Ayla Secura had trained in during her years of field triage, but it hummed with a precision that reminded her, unwillingly, of the medbay droids back at the temple, efficient, exacting, utterly without patience for argument. Dr. Bashir moved a scanning instrument over her shoulder where a blaster graze had cauterized itself against her montrals, his brow furrowed in the particular way of a man encountering biology that broke half his textbooks. "Your physiology is remarkable," he said, mostly to himself. Twin-lobed cranial structure. Elevated neural density. Are you always this aware of the room around you? Or is that a product of adrenaline? It's called the Force, Ayla said, patience thinning. I don't expect you to understand it. I don't have the luxury of explaining it right now. I have Jedi dying on 100 worlds and I am sitting in your medical bay instead of doing something about it. Which is precisely why the something we do next needs to be the right something. Cisco said from the doorway, arms folded, the weight of command sitting easily on him even in a borrowed crisis. "Doctor, is she fit to talk?" "Fit enough. Though I'd recommend against further lightsaber use for the next hour unless absolutely necessary." Bashir stepped back, giving Ayla room to sit upright. It was O'Brien who broke the next silence, jogging in from the corridor with a pad in hand and the expression of an engineer who had just found something he desperately wished he hadn't. "Captain, you're going to want to see this." Worf managed to isolate one of the surface transmissions before they went dark. Not voice traffic, data traffic. Some kind of military command signal. Broadcast to every clone unit simultaneously. Planet-wide, and based on the subspace bleed. Galaxy-wide. "Show me," Cisco said. O'Brien handed the pad across, and Bashir leaned in to read over the captain's shoulder, his clinical detachment slipping as the words registered. The chief had done what he could to translate the encoding into something readable, and what emerged was compact, bloodless, and devastating in its simplicity, a directive, distributed to every clone trooper in the Grand Army of the Republic, ordering the immediate termination of all Jedi generals as enemies of the Republic. Executive Order 66. Ayla read it twice before she spoke, and when she did, her voice had gone very quiet. "This isn't possible. The clones aren't capable of this. They're loyal. I've bled beside them. I've watched them die protecting Jedi they'd known for years. Something is wrong with the Order itself. Something is wrong with them." "That was my thought too," Bashir said slowly. "So I ran a molecular scan on the residue from the trooper who fired on you." Worf managed to pull some scorched armor fragments up with the transporter. "Beam along with you. Probably from proximity. There's biological material embedded in the shoulder plating. Human, cloned, heavily modified." He pulled up a secondary display, and the room went quiet as an image. "Resolved. a magnetic resonance scan of a human skull, and nestled at the base of it, wired directly into brain tissue. A small chip no larger than a fingernail. That doesn't belong there, Bashir said. That's not standard neural architecture for any humanoid species. I've cataloged. It's placed. Deliberately, surgically, and recently. Enough that the tissue around it still shows minor inflammation consistent with a procedure performed within the trooper's own lifetime, which, given what little Commander Worf could pull from Republic databases about the age of these clone soldiers, would have to mean at the moment of their creation. An inhibitor chip, Ayla said, and the words came out of her like something breaking. They're clones, grown for the war. I always assumed the uniformity of their training was discipline, conditioning, not this. She stared at the image, and for the first time since she'd arrived aboard the Defiant, something other than tactical urgency moved across her face. Grief, sharp and sudden, for 6 men she had called comrades and who had, in truth, never had a choice in what they were about to do to her. If that chip is standard issue across the entire clone army, Sisko said, his voice dropping into the register he reserved for the worst kind of bad news, then this isn't a mutiny. It's an assassination order that was built into every single one of these soldiers before they ever set foot on a battlefield. Somebody planned this years in advance. Who would do that? Bashir asked. Who benefits from destroying the very order that's been fighting alongside the Republic? Ayla's montrals twitched, some old and terrible instinct surfacing. The Chancellor commands the Grand Army directly, under wartime emergency powers granted by the Senate. If a chip like that exists in every clone soldier in the galaxy, only someone with authority over the entire cloning program could have ordered it installed. She looked up, and the horror in her expression had crystallized into something colder, sharper, the beginning of understanding. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. The name meant nothing to Sisko, but the shape of the accusation meant everything. He had built a career reading the architecture of conspiracies, the kind that hid behind titles and emergency powers and the comforting fiction of wartime necessity. Commander Worf, he said, turning toward the door, pull every scrap of data you can on this Chancellor. Doctor, I want a full report on how deep that chip's programming goes. Is it reversible? Can it be deactivated? And how many of these soldiers are we talking about across however many worlds this war is being fought on? Captain, Ayla was on her feet now, steadying herself against the bio bed, jaw set. You don't understand the scale of what you're proposing. There are millions of clone troopers. This isn't one ship's problem to solve. No, Sisko agreed. It isn't. But it's a problem sitting on top of your capital city right now. And I've never been the kind of officer who watches an execution order carry itself out. Because the scale is inconvenient. We start local. We start with what's still burning down there. And then we find out exactly how far this goes. The briefing room aboard the Defiant was cramped by the standards of the ship Sisko commanded her against. A converted cargo bay pressed into service for a crew that had learned to make war in tight spaces. Worf stood at the display table, a holographic projection of Coruscant rotating slowly above it, red markers blooming across the surface like a wound spreading, each one a location where a Jedi transmission had gone dark in the last hour. 41 signals terminated within Coruscant's city limits alone. Worf reported. Republic intelligence channels we've intercepted suggest similar operations underway on dozens of other worlds. Cato Neimoidia, Kashyyyk, Mygeeto, Felucia. This is not localized. It is coordinated across the entire war front, executed within minutes of each other despite the distances involved, which means it wasn't triggered by anything happening on the ground. Sisko said. It was triggered from somewhere central. A single signal, broadcast wide. The transmission, Chief O'Brien intercepted, originated from a Republic military relay. Here in the city, Worf confirmed, highlighting a tower near the Senate district. Given night, Sakura's assertion regarding the Chancellor's authority over the clone army, it is reasonable to conclude the order came from his office, or from someone acting with his authority. Ayla stood at the edge of the table, arms crossed, still wearing the singed remains of her Jedi robes, refusing Bashir's offer of a change of clothes, with the stubbornness of someone who wasn't ready to let go of the last hour yet. The council is gone, or scattered, or dead, I don't know which. and not knowing is its own kind of wound. If the Chancellor ordered this, then the Republic itself has been the enemy for longer than any of us understood. And I have spent 3 years commanding men who were built to kill me the moment someone gave the word. Which brings us to the actual decision in front of us, Sisko said. And the room's attention shifted to him. This isn't our war. This isn't our galaxy. Starfleet's directives on non-interference exist for good reason. We don't have the right to walk into a society's internal conflict and start rearranging the outcome because we happen to have superior technology. With respect, Captain, Bashir said quietly, there's a difference between a society's internal conflict and a systematic execution of an entire class of people using slaves who were never given a choice in the matter. I don't think the Prime Directive was written with genocide in mind. Sisko didn't answer immediately. He'd spent a career navigating the gap between principle and the raw, ugly texture of a crisis in progress, and he knew better than to pretend the answer was simple just because his instincts screamed at him to act. He'd watched the Federation debate the ethics of interference for years, watched good officers ruin their careers on both sides of that line, some for acting, some for standing by. But this wasn't a hypothetical in an academy seminar. This was a woman standing 3 meters away from him whose entire order was being murdered in real time on a planet directly beneath his ship. The Prime Directive, Sisko said slowly, applies to pre-warp civilizations we have no business influencing. Whatever this galaxy is, it has starships, hyperspace travel, and a technological base that in some respects outpaces our own. That's not a primitive culture we'd be corrupting by getting involved. That's a war already being fought on a battlefield we didn't choose, that we've been dropped into the middle of. So we're getting involved, Kira said from the doorway, arms folded, the ghost of old resistance fighter instincts audible in her voice. Just so we're all using the same words for it. We're getting involved, Sisko confirmed. But carefully, we are not the cavalry, and I will not turn this crew into an occupying force for a war we don't fully understand. We help where we can verify the harm is real and the target is defensible. We do not become the Federation's excuse for Palpatine's opposition to point fingers at later. Is that understood? Ayla studied him for a long moment. Something shifting behind her eyes. Not quite trust. Not yet, but the beginning of a working alliance built on mutual necessity, rather than shared history. There's a location. The Jedi Temple. If any of my orders survive the initial purge, that's where they'd have gone to ground, or where the clones will be hunting the hardest to make sure no one did. I need to go back. Not alone, Sisko said. Worf, assemble a security team. Doctor, I want you on standby with a mobile medical kit. If there are wounded down there, we're not leaving them behind because evacuation is inconvenient. Chief, can you get us in without alerting every clone unit in the city that a starship just decloaked in their airspace? Give me 20 minutes and I can get you a transporter window through the temple's remaining shield gaps, O'Brien said. Any longer than that, and the fires up there might make the whole question moot. Sisko nodded once, the decision made and settling into him with the particular weight of every choice he'd made since taking command of a station on the edge of a war he hadn't started. Then let's not waste the 20 minutes. Ayla, you're with me. You know that building better than any sensor readout we could generate. Let's go see what's left of your temple. She fell into step beside him without hesitation, and for the first time since the fountain courtyard, something like purpose replaced the raw grief in her expression. Whatever the Defiant was, whoever these strangers were, they had just chosen, deliberately, with eyes open, to stand against an order that the rest of the galaxy would spend the next 2 decades believing was righteous and just. It would not be enough to save everyone. Ayla already understood that much, but it might be enough to save someone. And in a galaxy being rewritten by betrayal in real time, that had become the only math that mattered. The Jedi Temple burned in 3 places when the transporter beam released Sisko, Ayla, Worf, and a 2-man security detail onto a scorched terrace overlooking the room of 1,000 fountains. Smoke hung low across the ancient stonework, and the air carried the acrid bite of blaster residue mixed with something older and stranger, ozone. Ayla would have called it once. Before she understood, it was the smell of the Force itself curdling under Violence it was never meant to answer to. Sensors show at least a dozen clone units still active inside the complex. Worf reported, his disruptor already drawn, eyes scanning the corridors. Ahead with the flat calculation of a Klingon assessing terrain for the fight to come. Life signs beyond that are inconsistent, difficult to distinguish survivors from residual thermal signatures. Then we move fast, and we look with our own eyes, Sisko said. Ayla, you're on point. You know this building. Where would survivors be? The lower archives, if they're smart. Or the creche levels, if they're not thinking clearly at all and running on instinct to protect the younglings. First, her voice caught on the last word, and she pushed past it, breaking into a run down a corridor, half collapsed from something that had clearly detonated within the last hour. The creche. We go there first. If any of the initiates survive the first wave, they won't have anywhere else to run. They moved through the temples. Wreckage like a strike team assembled from two different centuries of warfare. Worf's economical, brutal Klingon efficiency. The Starfleet security details' disciplined phaser cover. Ayla's lightsaber, lighting the smoke-choked corridors blue-green as she cut through a fused blast door with the controlled fury of someone who had stopped, separating grief from purpose. Sisko brought up the rear, phaser rifle in hand, cataloging every doorway, every shadow, with the wariness of a man who had commanded a station through worse and survived by never assuming a crisis had shown him its full shape yet. They found the first clone squad in what had been a meditation garden, a droid-scarred sculpture of some serene Jedi master lying shattered among the wreckage. For troopers, weapons trained on a huddled group of children in Jedi robes too large for their small frames. None of them older than 9 or 10 by any reasonable estimate Sisko could make. The lead trooper's helmet turned toward the new arrivals. Weapon shifting target with mechanical indifference. Belay that order, Sisko said, voice carrying the full authority of 30 years commanding men and women through worse odds than these. Whatever's in your head telling you those are enemies, it's lying to you. The trooper didn't hesitate, didn't waver, didn't show a flicker of the loyalty Ayla had insisted these men still possessed somewhere beneath their conditioning. His weapon discharged, and Worf's shoulder took the bolt meant for Sisko's chest. The Klingon grunting in pain but staying upright, already returning fire with brutal precision that dropped the trooper before he could fire again. Chips too deep, Ayla said grimly, deflecting a second volley back into the trooper who'd fired it, the bolt catching him center mass. There's no reasoning with them. I'm sorry, I hoped there might be. It was over in seconds. The security details, disciplined fire, and Ayla's saber work clearing the remaining troopers before the children had time to fully process what was happening around them. In the sudden quiet, Sisko crouched down to their level, setting his weapon aside, keeping his voice as level and calm as he could, managed with adrenaline still hammering through him. You're safe now, he said. My name's Sisko. I'm not going to hurt you, and neither is anyone with me. Can you tell me if there are others? Anywhere else in this building? It was the oldest of them, a Twi'lek girl who couldn't have been more than 11, who found her voice first, her eyes darting between Sisko's unfamiliar uniform and Ayla's lightsaber with something between terror and desperate hope. Master Yoda, she said. He came through here not long ago. He told us to hide. Told us he was going to try to reach the council chambers. That if the order was truly being hunted, he needed to know how far it went before deciding what came next. Ayla's head snapped toward the girl. Master Yoda is alive? He was. I don't know if he still is. The girl's composure cracked at last, tears cutting tracks through soot on her face. Everyone's dying. Master Wind didn't come back. Master Kohler didn't come back. Nobody's coming back. Sisko exchanged a glance with Worf, who inclined his head fractionally, a soldier's acknowledgement that the mission had just widened in scope without anyone's permission. Worf, get these children back to the transport point and get Bashir down here to check them over. Ayla and I are going after the council chambers. Captain, splitting our forces in a hostile structure with unknown numbers of hostiles remaining is. Noted, Commander. Do it anyway. Sisko was already moving, and Ayla fell into step beside him without needing to be asked twice. The two of them cutting deeper into the burning temple toward whatever remained of the highest authority the Jedi Order had left. A 900-year-old master whose survival might be the difference between an order that ended today and one that had, however narrowly, a future still worth fighting for. Behind them, the children were led toward the terrace and the promise of a ship that didn't belong to any galaxy they'd been born into, carrying with them the first proof the Defiant's crew had earned that their choice to interfere, however dangerous, however far outside the neat boundaries of their own directives, had already, in this one small corridor, saved something worth saving. The council chambers sat at the temple's summit, a circular room ringed with high windows that should have looked out over a city at peace and instead framed a skyline smudged with smoke from a dozen separate fires. Cisco and Ayla reached it through a stairwell choked with debris, past the bodies of clone troopers who had clearly met something considerably more dangerous than either of them on the way up. Precise saber wounds, cauterized clean, the unmistakable signature of a duelist operating at the very edge of his abilities. They found Grandmaster Yoda, standing amid the wreckage of the chamber's central dais, small and ancient and radiating a stillness that seemed entirely separate from the devastation around him. He did not startle at their arrival. He simply turned, ears lifting slightly, regarding Cisco with an attention that felt uncomfortably like being weighed on some scale the Starfleet captain had no context for. Master Yoda. Ayla's voice cracked with relief she didn't bother hiding. We feared the worst. Feared it myself, I did, Yoda said, leaning on his jimmer stick, his gaze never quite leaving Cisco. But here you stand. Knight Secura, when dead you should be by every account reaching me. And here beside you, a presence I do not recognize, not of the Force, and not of this galaxy. Curious, that is. Very curious. Captain Benjamin Sisko, USS Defiant, Cisco said, offering the introduction with the careful formality of a man meeting a head of state he didn't yet understand the rules for. My ship arrived here by accident less than 2 hours ago. We've been trying to help where we can sense. Accident. Yoda's ears twitched, something unreadable moving behind ancient eyes. Believe in accidents, I do not. Captain Sisko. Believe in the will of the Force. Complicated and strange as it often is, I do. Perhaps arrived you have not by chance, but because needed, you were. With respect, Master Yoda, I don't put much stock in mysticism deciding my ship's flight plans. We fell through a rupture in space we don't understand, in the middle of a battle that wasn't ours, and now several hundred lives depend on decisions I'm making with about 1% of the information I'd normally require. Cisco's tone was blunt, but not unkind, the tone of a man laying his cards on the table because pretense felt like a luxury neither of them had time for. What I need from you is simple. How far does this purge go? Is there a council left to save, or are we standing in the last of it? Yoda's expression didn't change, but something in the room's air seemed to grow heavier, the weight of a 900-year-old. Grief settling over the small figure, like a physical thing. Scattered, the council is. Windu, fallen in the Chancellor's own office. Sensed I did, moments before the order came. A duel he should have won, and did not. Others across the galaxy, cut down by the men they led, before understanding even what had happened to them. Alive, some remain. How many, I cannot yet say. The Force itself has grown quiet, Captain. Quiet in a way I have not felt in 900 years of listening to it. Windu confronted Palpatine directly. Ayla's voice was sharp with sudden understanding. Then the Chancellor's true nature is confirmed. Confirmed, and worse than feared, Yoda said grimly. Not merely complicit in this betrayal, Chancellor Palpatine is. Architect of it, he is. A Sith Lord, hidden within the Republic's own halls of power for longer than any of us dared imagine, and now, with the order broken and the Senate his to command, poised to declare himself something considerably worse than Chancellor. Cisco absorbed this with the flat calm of a man who had learned, over a career of crises, to compartmentalize horror until there was time to properly feel it. How does a war get engineered this thoroughly? Millions of soldiers, a Senate willing to hand over emergency powers, an entire order of, what did you call them, peacekeepers? Left blind to a conspiracy sitting at the center of their own government. Patience, deception, and the long game of the dark side, Yoda said. 10 years, this plan required, perhaps longer. Manufactured, this war was, by the same hand that now claims to end it. A tragedy in two acts, Captain Sisko, and we are living the final scene of the second. The weight of that settled into the room, and for a long moment nobody spoke. Then Yoda's gaze sharpened, fixing on Sisko with new intensity. A choice you and your ship represent, Captain. Involve yourselves further in this, and change the shape of this galaxy's grief, you may. Or withdraw, and let history unfold as it was always going to. Before your arrival disturbed its course. Which path calls to you, I cannot say. But choose, you must. And soon, for the Force does not wait patiently on indecision. And neither, I suspect, does your own conscience. Sisko held the ancient Jedi's gaze, and somewhere behind him, through the shattered windows of a temple burning at the heart of a dying republic, the sound of distant blaster fire reminded them both that whatever decision came next would have to be made standing, not sitting, because the war outside had no intention of waiting for either of them to finish weighing its cost. The decision, when it came, arrived less as a proclamation and more as a series of small, immediate choices that added up to something irreversible before Sisko had fully articulated it to himself. Yoda's question hung in the smoke-filled air of the council chamber, and Sisko found himself answering it not with words but with the tap of his comm badge. Sisko to Defiant. Worf, status on the evacuation. Worf's voice crackled back, tight with the strain of a man fighting a delaying action. Asterisk, 11 children recovered from the crash level. Captain, transported aboard successfully. However, we've encountered a second group, approximately 15 younglings and 2 wounded Padawans, pinned in the lower archive levels. Clone forces have sealed the primary exits. O'Brien reports the transporter cannot achieve a lock through the archives, shielding without a clearer line of sight. Sisko looked to Yoda. 15 children, trapped behind a blockade of soldiers who used to protect them. Master Yoda, I need you to tell me plainly. Is there a version of non-interference that lets me walk away from that number? Yoda's ears drooped. The particular sorrow of 900 years compressed into a single expression. No such version exists, Captain, in any philosophy I have studied. But know this, choose to act, and the Force will remember the choice long after you and your ship have returned to your own stars. Consequences ripple wider than we can see in moments such as these. Understood. I'll take that as permission. Sisko was already moving, Ayla a half-step behind him, both of them descending through the temple's ruined stairwells at a pace that left little breath for further conversation. Behind them, Yoda followed with a speed that belied his diminutive frame, his Jimmer stick abandoned against a shattered pillar. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order moving now with the fluid, dangerous grace of a warrior who had simply chosen, for decades, not to advertise what he was still capable of. They reached the archive levels, main corridor to find it exactly as Worf had described, the choke point, sealed by a full clone platoon, blast doors welded shut behind them. The children's only escape route cut off by soldiers arrayed with the patient mechanical certainty of men executing an order they had no capacity to question. Numbers? Sisko asked, pressed against the corridor's edge. 12 visible, possibly more beyond the bend. Ayla whispered back. Too many for a direct assault without significant risk to the children behind them. Then we don't go through them, Sisko said. Master Yoda, can you draw their attention? Buy us an opening. Yoda's eyes glinted with something that might, in a smaller and less dire context, have passed for amusement. Draw attention, I can do, Captain. Very good at that. I have always been. And then he was moving. A green blur bursting from cover directly into the clone platoon's firing line. Lightsaber ignited and already deflecting a wall of blaster bolts back into the soldiers who'd fired them with a speed and precision that made Ayla's considerable skill look, by comparison, merely mortal. The platoon's formation broke instantly, half its number wheeling to engage the 900-year-old master who had just turned their own choke point into a killing field. And in the chaos of that redirected attention, Sisko and Ayla slipped past the corridor's edge toward the sealed archive doors beyond. Chief, I need that door open. Now, Sisko said into his comm badge, pressed flat against the archive's blast door. Working on it, Captain. But this Republic hardware wasn't built with Starfleet override codes in mind. Give me 90 seconds. You have 30. O'Brien did not, in fact, need 30. He needed closer to 60. Each second of it audible in the sounds of the corridor behind them, where Yoda's lone stand against a dozen conditioned soldiers had begun, inevitably, to draw reinforcements from elsewhere in the burning temple. But the door finally hissed open, and behind it, huddled in the dim emergency lighting of the archive's lower stacks, 15 terrified children and 2 bleeding Padawans looked up at Ayla's face with the particular desperate hope of people who had stopped minutes earlier, believing rescue was still a possibility the galaxy owed them. "We're getting you out," Ayla said, already moving among them, checking the Padawan's wounds with practiced hands. "Stay close, stay quiet, and trust the Force to carry you the rest of the way, even when nothing else makes sense." Cisco keyed his comm badge again. "O'Brien, I need a transporter lock the moment we clear this doorway. As many as you can take in a single cycle." "Understood, Captain." Cycling now, they emerged into the corridor to a scene that had shifted decisively in the intervening minute. Yoda still standing, still fighting, but bleeding from a shallow cut along one arm. The reinforcements Cisco had feared now pressing the ancient master from 2 directions at once. Ayla didn't hesitate, igniting her saber and diving into the fight without a word, buying Yoda room to breathe as the children streamed past behind Cisco toward the transport point. The shimmer of the Defiant's beam took the last of the younglings just as a fresh squad rounded the corridor's far bend, weapons already rising, and in that narrow, burning gap between rescue and catastrophe, Cisco understood with sudden and total clarity that whatever line existed between observer and participant, the Defiant's crew had crossed it so thoroughly there was no longer any pretending otherwise. The corridor became a killing ground in the seconds after the last youngling vanished into the Defiant's transporter beam, and Cisco found himself doing something he had not done since the darkest days of the Dominion War, fighting shoulder to shoulder with allies who spoke no common language of tactics, trusting instinct and improvisation over any coordinated plan. "Fall back to the stairwell," he shouted, laying down phaser fire that dropped 2 advancing troopers before they could bring their weapons fully to bear. Beside him, Ayla and Yoda fought in a rhythm that seemed to require no communication at all, their blades weaving a defense that turned the narrow corridor into a bottleneck no clone platoon could easily overwhelm. But the numbers kept coming. Whatever alarm had gone out through the temple's remaining garrison, it had summoned considerably more than the 12 troopers who had first sealed the archive corridor. Cisco's tricorder equivalent, hastily borrowed sensor readings from Worf, showed at least 30 additional signatures converging from 3 separate directions, a coordinated pincer that suggested someone somewhere had finally noticed a starship crew was actively interfering with Order 66's execution. "Captain," Worf's voice crackled through the comm badge, tight with urgency. "Sensors are detecting a Republic cruiser altering course toward the Temple District. If it's responding to reports of unauthorized activity, we may face considerably more than infantry within minutes." "Copy that. We're moving as fast as we can." Cisco ducked behind a collapsed pillar as blaster fire chewed through the stone above him. "Yoda, is there another way down from this level?" A maintenance shaft, several corridors distant. Narrow, but passable. Yoda deflected a bolt with barely a glance in its direction, his focus entirely on the advancing troopers. "Reach it? We can. But hold this position long enough to reach it. We must first." It was Ayla who made the next decision, breaking from the defensive line with a suddenness that startled even Cisco. She drove forward into the advancing clones with a fury that had less to do with tactics than with 3 years of grief. Finally finding an outlet, her saber a blur that dropped 3 troopers in as many seconds before she spun back, breathing hard, eyes blazing with something that was equal parts warrior and mourner. "That's not sustainable," Cisco said sharply, hauling her back by the shoulder as more troopers filled the gap she'd created. "I need you thinking, not grieving. We survive this by working together, not by you trying to avenge every clone you ever called a friend in a single corridor." The rebuke landed, and something in Ayla's expression cracked open, not weakness, but a kind of honesty she hadn't had time to feel since the fountain courtyard hours earlier. I don't know how to fight men I loved, she said, voice raw. I don't know how to make that make sense. You don't have to make it make sense right now, Cisco said. You have to get these children the rest of the way to safety. Grieve later. Survive first. It was blunt, and it was exactly what she needed. Ayla's expression hardened back into focus, and the three of them began a fighting retreat toward the maintenance shaft. Yoda had indicated trading ground for time, buying just enough space, with each exchange to keep the pursuing clones from closing the distance entirely. They reached the shaft with the pincers, outer edge less than 30 meters behind them, Yoda dropping down first, with an agility that defied every assumption his frame suggested. Ayla following, Cisco bringing up the rear with his phaser rifle, laying down suppressing fire until the last possible moment. Defiant, this is Cisco. We're clear of the archive level. Moving toward extraction point 2. What's the status on that Republic cruiser? Captain. Worf's voice carried an edge. Cisco had rarely heard from the Klingon officer. The cruiser has begun launching starfighters. Estimated time to intercept range with our current position for minutes. I recommend immediate extraction. Copy. We're moving. Cisco dropped into the maintenance shaft after the others, the sound of pursuing troopers growing distant above them as they descended into the temple's lower infrastructure. O'Brien, I need that transporter lock the moment we're clear of interference. Standing by, Captain. Just say the word. They emerged onto a lower service platform, exposed to open sky through a section of collapsed wall. And above them, for the first time since their arrival, Cisco caught sight of the true scale of what the Defiant had inserted itself into, not merely a burning temple, but a fleet in motion. Republic cruisers repositioning across Coruscant's orbital lanes with the swift, practiced coordination of a military apparatus that had, in the space of a few hours, been repurposed entirely to a new and terrible mission. Cisco to Defiant. 3 to beam up immediately. The last thing Cisco saw before the transporter's shimmer took him was Yoda's face turned skyward, small and ancient and unreadable, watching the Republic he had served for centuries reorganize itself into something he no longer recognized. And in that fractured, unguarded moment, Cisco understood that whatever the Defiant chose to do next would not merely save lives in the hours ahead. It would help decide what kind of galaxy rose from the ashes of the one currently burning beneath them. The bridge of the Defiant felt smaller than usual with Yoda standing at its center, his presence somehow filling the compact space in a way that made the ship's usual crew complement seem suddenly aware of exactly how far from home they'd traveled. 26 children now occupied the mess hall and adjoining quarters, watched over by 2 exhausted Padawans and a security detail, reassigned to childcare duty with the particular grace of Starfleet officers, improvising far outside their training. But the crisis had not ended with their extraction. It had simply changed shape. Captain, the Republic cruiser is hailing all vessels in the sector, Worf reported. Encrypted, but the pattern suggests a general order, likely a shoot-on-sight directive for any craft, assisting what they are now designating as Jedi fugitives. They know we exist, Cisco said grimly, which means Palpatine knows we exist. An unavoidable consequence, Captain, Yoda said, watching the tactical display with an intensity that suggested he understood considerably more about starship warfare than his archaic robes and Jimmer stick implied. Once discovered, action invites reaction. The Chancellor, the Emperor, as he will soon declare himself, cannot permit an unknown power to interfere so directly in his moment of triumph. Seek to eliminate you, he will, or seek to understand and use you. Should elimination prove impossible, then we have a decision to make before he makes it for us, Cisco said. Ayla, you said Master Windu confronted Palpatine directly and lost. Is there any chance the same confrontation, differently resourced, ends differently? Ayla's expression tightened. Windu was one of the greatest duelists our order has produced in a generation, and he still fell. I don't know what you're proposing, Captain, but if it involves fighting a Sith Lord in single combat, I'd remind you that I am not Windu, and neither, with respect, are you. I'm not proposing a duel, Cisco said. I'm proposing we use what we actually have that this galaxy doesn't, technology they've never seen and can't yet defend against. Worf, tactical assessment. If we needed to extract every surviving Jedi we can locate within the next several hours, cloaked, before the Empire fully consolidates its grip on the fleet and the Senate. What would that operation look like? Worf's eyes narrowed with the particular satisfaction of a warrior finally being handed a problem suited to his skills. Ambitious, dangerous. We would need to coordinate transporter locks across multiple, simultaneous locations, likely requiring us to decloak repeatedly in contested airspace. Casualties among our own crew would be a realistic possibility. I'm not asking you to sugarcoat it. I'm asking if it's possible. Possible, not guaranteed. Yoda stepped forward, his gaze moving between Sisko and the tactical display with the weight of a decision that had clearly been forming in him since the Temple's council chamber. A larger question this raises, Captain. Rescue individual Jedi, you may. Change the outcome of this day for a scattered few, you may. But the empire that rises after this day, reshape its coming entirely. You cannot, nor should you attempt it. Some tragedies, meant to happen, are not because deserved, but because the galaxy's balance requires the weight of what comes after. With respect, Master Yoda, Sisko said, I don't put a lot of faith in cosmic balance requiring genocide as payment. I've spent my career refusing to accept that suffering serves some greater architecture I'm not allowed to interfere with. I'll rescue who I can reach. I won't pretend that's the same as fixing your galaxy. But it's not nothing either. Yoda studied him for a long moment. Something unreadable passing behind ancient eyes, not disagreement. Exactly, but the particular sorrow of someone who suspected the Starfleet. Captain was both right and dangerously naive in the same breath. Then help you. I will, in what time remains. But choose your targets with care, Captain. Every Jedi saved is a Jedi the Empire will hunt with more resources, more purpose. Once your ship departs this galaxy and cannot protect them further, consider carefully what mercy costs those who receive it. The warning landed heavily. But Sisko had already made his choice hours earlier. In a burning courtyard, in a corridor full of frightened children. Worf, give me a list of every location, transmitting distress signals in the last 2 hours that we can plausibly reach. Ayla, you're going to help me prioritize masters and knights who might have information about the wider scope of this purge. Take priority over isolated individuals, purely on tactical grounds. And I want you to know I hate saying that sentence out loud. I understand the logic, Ayla said quietly. I hate it too. Over the next 3 hours, the Defiant became something unlike anything her design specifications had anticipated. A lifeboat cutting through hostile airspace, decloaking in brief, calculated windows to extract Jedi survivors from 6 separate locations across Coruscant before Republic forces could triangulate their position with any consistency. Some extractions succeeded cleanly. One did not, a security officer named Wilkins taking a blaster bolt to the chest covering a wounded Jedi Master's transport, surviving only because Bashir's medical technology outpaced anything this galaxy's battlefield medicine could offer. By the time Worf reported, Imperial starfighter squadrons beginning to actively hunt the Defiant's ion trail. 31 Jedi, Masters, Knights, and Padawans together sat aboard a ship never designed to carry them. Alive because a captain from a galaxy 40,000 light-years distant had decided that scale was not a good enough reason to let an execution finish uninterrupted. Captain, Worf said, we cannot continue this indefinitely. Imperial forces are adapting to our tactics. The window for further extraction is closing rapidly, and remaining in this system invites confrontation we may not survive. Sisko looked at the 31 faces now sheltering aboard his ship, then at Yoda, whose expression had shifted into something that might, in a being of such age, have passed for cautious respect. Then we've done what we can do here. Time to decide what comes next, for them and for us. The decision crystallized in the Defiance briefing room with the same clarity that had guided every choice Sisko had made since the ship first tore through Coruscant's atmosphere. Not a plan born of certainty, but the best available answer to an impossible question, made with eyes open and consequences accepted. We can't stay in this galaxy indefinitely, Sisko said, addressing the assembled group. Worf, Bashir, O'Brien, Kira, and Yoda, with Ayla standing near the door, close enough to the makeshift quarters where 31 rescued Jedi and 26 children were beginning, tentatively, to imagine a future that hours earlier had seemed impossible. Our supplies aren't infinite. Our presence here has already provoked a response we can't fully predict. And every hour we remain increases the risk to everyone aboard this ship, Jedi and crew alike. Then where do 31 Jedi and 26 children go? Kira asked. We can't exactly drop them back on Coruscant. No, Yoda agreed. Return to the temple, they cannot. Hunted, they will remain. For years, perhaps decades, wherever they resettle within this galaxy. The Empire's reach, considerable it will become, and patient in its hunting. It was Ayla who offered the answer none of them had quite dared suggest aloud. There are worlds beyond the Republic's immediate reach, outer rim systems. Places even the Empire will take years to fully consolidate. If the Defiant could transport us to one of them, quietly, without drawing attention to the location itself, we could begin again. Not as an order, not yet, but as survivors, together, with time to decide what comes next. Chief, can we manage a discreet insertion somewhere remote enough to buy them real time? Sisko asked. O'Brien nodded slowly, already running calculations. Give me a few hours with the NAV charts. Worf pulled from that Republic cruiser's data before we lost contact. If there's an outer rim world with minimal Imperial presence, I can plot a low-profile approach that won't leave much of a trail to follow. The choice of world came down, eventually, to a modest agricultural planet on the fringes of Republic space, one whose remoteness had kept it from any of the war's major campaigns, and whose population had little reason to report unusual arrivals. To an empire still consolidating, its grip closer to the core, the Defiant made planetfall under cover of a manufactured ion storm Worf and O'Brien engineered specifically to mask their signature, and over the course of several tense hours, 31 Jedi and 26 children began the quiet work of disappearing into a galaxy that had, that very day, decided their kind no longer had a right to exist within it. Yoda was the last to leave the ship, pausing at the airlock to regard Sisko with an expression that carried the full weight of 900 years of hard-won wisdom, tempered now by something that had not existed in him that morning. Cautious, complicated hope, a debt the Jedi owe you, Captain Sisko, that we may never find the means to repay, Yoda said. Wrong, I was, to counsel against your intervention so firmly. Some tragedies, perhaps, are not meant to unfold entirely as written, changed. They can be, by those willing to bear the cost of changing them. You weren't wrong to be cautious, Sisko said. You were wrong about what caution required. There's a difference. He extended a hand, and Yoda took it, the gesture spanning a gap between two galaxies that no treaty or protocol had ever anticipated bridging. Rebuild what you can. Teach them caution, but don't teach them so much of it that they forget what happened today. That's the only advice I've got. Wisdom enough, that is, for any teacher, Yoda said, and then he was gone. Small and ancient and quietly resolute, walking out into a galaxy that would spend the next 2 decades believing the Jedi Order had been extinguished entirely, never knowing that 31 embers of it had survived, hidden, waiting, because a starship from beyond the stars had refused to accept that scale was a good enough reason to let in execution finish uninterrupted. The Defiant broke orbit within the hour, her cloak engaging as she climbed back toward the anomaly that had first delivered her into this galaxy's darkest day, a rupture that O'Brien, working against the clock, had determined was cyclical, likely to reopen along a predictable trajectory if approached with the right resonance frequency. Sisko stood on the bridge as Coruscant fell away behind them, thinking of a fountain courtyard, a burning temple, a 900-year-old master's cautious warning about the cost of mercy, and of 31 Jedi now beginning a hidden resistance the Empire would spend a generation failing to fully extinguish, never knowing the true reason its purge had not, after all, been complete. The wormhole took them within the hour, violet light swallowing the Defiant whole, and somewhere behind them, in a galaxy already reshaping itself around a lie, the first quiet seeds of a rebellion. The history books would never fully explain had been planted, not by prophecy, not by destiny, but by a captain who had simply refused to look away. The Defiant tore free of the wormhole's violet grip and settled, at last, into familiar stars, the Bajoran system unfolding across her view screen exactly as she had left it, as though no time at all had passed in the galaxy she called home. But her crew had not returned unchanged. 31 Jedi now lived because a captain had chosen intervention over doctrine, mercy over the comfortable arithmetic of non-interference. 26 children would grow up in exile rather than in graves, carrying forward an order the rest of their galaxy believed extinct. Order 66 had not been stopped. The Republic still fell. The Empire still rose from its ashes. And Palpatine still claimed a throne built on betrayal and manufactured war. But history, Sisko understood now, was not always a single unbroken line. Sometimes, it was a story with quiet exceptions, embers preserved against the coming, dark by those willing to bear the cost of preserving them. Aboard a hidden world at the galaxy's edge, 31 Jedi began, in secret, to rebuild. The Empire would hunt for them for 20 years and never fully understand why its purge had failed to be complete.